Take a pit stop for all things NASCAR with the Four Tire Change podcast. Here is your host, Dawson Iserlo.
Four Tire Change episode 10. Welcome back in. Dawson Iserlo with you for ESPN Southwest Louisiana. A busy week in NASCAR, an exciting race in some regards, maybe some boring aspects of it as well at Circuit of the Americas. We'll break that down, also get you a preview for Richmond here coming up in the next or this weekend actually, on Sunday night, the Easter special race, which I have, some mixed thoughts about having the race on Easter. I guess NASCAR knows they can get their ratings in. That'll be later, but for now, let's start with Circuit of the Americas, added to the NASCAR schedule a couple of years back. The first race was an absolute disaster. Rain everywhere. Cars were plowing into the back of each other, destroying each other. It was exciting because of the chaos, but obviously it wasn't really indicative of the type of race NASCAR wants to put on. I mean, you had really some safety concerns with the lack of visibility and everything else there, but it was their first year at COTA. It felt like they really wanted to get the race in, and they did their best, but all in all, it was kind of a disaster, right? Well, last year was better. This year, I don't know. They added stage cautions back in for the road courses, which I wasn't a fan of. And I thought Michael McDowell, I mentioned this last week, I think, but Michael McDowell had some great comments about what it does for strategy and, the way it basically makes drivers choose between stage points and trying to race for the win. And I don't know if we should be putting drivers and teams in that situation at these types of tracks. I really don't agree with that. But that's what they did, and it gives you some restarts. And, look, the way this race played out, there were no natural cautions. So you only had the stage cautions. So if there weren't those, again, now if there aren't stage breaks, you figure maybe this race plays out a little bit differently. Maybe some guys are trying to push it. Maybe you would have had a caution if you didn't have the stage breaks, but you don't end up with any. So you wouldn't have had any restarts. You wouldn't have had any of that, type of things. This race would have flown by and been done in a couple hours, right? But all in all, they end up having the stage breaks, and exactly what we thought kind of played out. Guys who stayed out for strategy-wise got the stage points. Now, the way it usually kind of works out, the leaders could cycle back in even after they pitted and maybe get a couple in the back end of the stage. But for the most part, those are the guys who, got the stage points. Not the ones who were racing for the win, but the ones who were just trying to make a day out of it, right, with some points. So that took place. Look, the racing itself, I thought it was really difficult to pass. I think we saw that when cars got up to the lead pack or up to the leaders and tried to get around them, it was more difficult. So we saw a really interesting thing play out at the end of this race here where Christopher Bell is on a little bit different strategy. He's got fresher tires. He's much faster than the guys at the front, William Byron, who was leading the way. And then he had Ty Gibbs in front of him, his teammate, which I'm going to get to that in a minute. But even if he'd have gotten there, I saw some people saying if he had a couple more laps, he'd have got past Byron. I don't know if he'd have gotten past them. I mean, he'd have had to move him because it just wasn't going to be – he wasn't fast enough, or really hardly anybody was fast enough to just make clean passes against a car like Byron, who was already pretty quick himself. So I don't know. I saw that argument, and I'm not sure I agree with it. Now, would Bell have made a move and tried to move him to win the race? Yeah, there's a good chance he would have. But I don't think he'd have just gotten there and blown past him, even though he was clearly, a lap faster or close to it down the stretch. So that's what I thought about that. Here's the deal with what happened with Ty Gibbs. So essentially, Gibbs is about 4 seconds back of Byron, and Bell catches Gibbs with, 3 or 4 laps to go. And Gibbs didn't let him by. I mean, he raced him, and eventually Bell did get around. But I do think Gibbs' best shot there, not only for his teammate to maybe get a chance to getting the win, I think his best shot was letting him go. Because, I think at that point, Gibbs is not fast enough to run down Byron. It's kind of, we can see it with the lap times. Even though, I thought Boyer kept pushing Gibbs on the broadcast like he thinks Gibbs is the one who could get there. You just look at the lap data, and it wasn't going to work. He wasn't going to run him down in time. So I think his best shot was exactly what we saw in the Xfinity race, which, and I heard Jordan Bianchi talking about this on his podcast after, which, of course, he does with Jeff Gluck over there at The Athletic. Those guys do a great job. And you saw it in the Xfinity race. The two leaders got into each other, and that caused third place Kyle Larson to go right past. I think that was Gibbs' best chance to win the race. And even if, let's say, a clean pass happens and it doesn't, well, now you're giving your teammate a chance to win the race, and Gibbs is still going to be in victory lane, which, look, not only is he a racer for Joe Gibbs Racing, his last name's Gibbs. He's part of the family. So, looking out for the best interest of the team, you would imagine, is something that should matter to him. But I'm not saying it's an egregious thing that he didn't let him go. I understand why he wanted to fight for second, and I also heard, some others bring up the point that if he, stays out there and let's say a caution comes out and he's able to stay in second, now he's got the best chance because he's going to be starting outside of Byron on the last restart. So I get all that. It was exciting, at least the last 10, 15 laps. We had this kind of can they run them down theme, which we've had at road courses a lot recently. Remember when Michael McDowell won last year at the Indy Road Course? That was kind of it. Chase Elliott was running him down and who was going to get there. So that stuff seems to happen. It's also a matter of maybe the leaders sometimes are saving their stuff, and that all comes to managing a good race, and I like that strategy is involved. Corner cutting was a thing here, track limits. So essentially they didn't have track limits for much of this course, but they did in certain turns, like turn 6, I think, was the biggest culprit, and everybody kept getting stuck with the corner cutting. They gave out 30-something penalties in the Xfinity and truck races. I thought it was really ticky-tack. You heard a good job, too. Daniel Suarez was actually on the Xfinity broadcast, and he was doing a good job explaining the fact that when you're racing behind someone, let's say you're directly behind someone, and they go up to take that corner, whether they cut it, especially if they cut the corner, and you're not going to be able to see where you're putting your car. And this is fractions of an inch that are making these differences in these penalties or not. And so I really didn't think it was fair. I didn't like the way NASCAR was handling it. And then, even if that driver in front of you doesn't cut the corner, you're still limiting your vision now of where you're putting that car because you're trying to be so precise. And so rather than have any sort of warning system or anything, they were just penalizing drivers with a whole drive-through. I understand they said basically they couldn't do the stop-and-go penalty that's kind of customary at NASCAR road courses, or has become that way, at least at the Roval and such, because there wasn't space at this particular facility. Listen, I don't know what the solution is, but I don't think it's penalizing drivers, basically taking them out of the race for one slight, tiny mistake. And again, is on a track where there aren't track limits in some places, but there are in others. And I understand the S is you have to, because drivers would just cut right through it. It would be a disaster if you didn't have those penalties. But I did not like the way that they overall, tried to police that situation. And luckily, the Cup drivers, I think, kind of learned from the Xfinity drivers in a way. They're more talented and better drivers anyway, because that's why they're in the top level. And I thought they learned from the Xfinity and the truck penalties, and they were a little bit more careful about it. But I don't know. I wasn't a fan of that. I think you're kind of towing a line there. I don't know. And then SVG gets a 30-second penalty in the Xfinity race, which he would have finished second. He ends up finishing 27th as a result. That's massive for a team like that. Like SVG, I think we all think he's going to win an Xfinity road course this year and get himself in the playoffs that way, but he's fighting for the playoffs, man, and 25 spots there, so that's 20-something points he just lost out on because of the last lap of the race with a little bit of a corner situation. I don't know. I think that's tough. Last thing I wanted to get to with this race before we kind of go into some of the standing stuff. Brad Keselowski had a miserable day, and his up and down year kind of continues. We'll see. He's kind of going to be in Joey Logano territory for now. Guys who have been kind of struggling the first portion of the season and are on the outside looking in. But I think there's going to be enough good points days to recover from that. The thing he's got to worry about, though, is if some other drivers come up there and win some races, those spots are going to shrink. And that's what we talked about with Logano a couple weeks back. I think he's fine right now. He's going to get in on points if he just keeps racing the way he is, finishing in the top 15, top 10 pretty consistently. But if you get some surprise winners at the other drafting tracks or the other road courses, we've seen guys like Michael McDowell in the past jump up and win one of those races, you could start to see that bubble shrink, and that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Kobayashi raced yesterday. He got spun multiple times, and it's tough for me because we've seen this a couple times now. These road course races are getting other drivers into the sport, whether it's supercar drivers, whether it's drivers with F1 experience or IndyCar experience. They want to get behind the wheel of these things, and they're having fun doing it. But also, the NASCAR drivers, to me, it feels like, are really going out of their way to show them what NASCAR racing is about, right? Using the fenders, guys, spinning guys out if you feel you've been wrong, getting them back. And for Kobayashi to get, done to twice there, and Stenhouse gets him again, which Stenhouse got into him last year when he came over, and then Kobayashi kind of, I guess, tried to settle the score today. Like, I don't know. I just wish the NASCAR driver, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say they should take it easy on him in any way, shape, or form. That's not the case. But it's tough to see. I wonder how a guy like Kobayashi's feeling right now after getting spun twice, after having his issues last year, and just feeling like, these NASCAR drivers are maybe out to get him in some ways. I don't know if that's really the truth, but I imagine he might feel that way at some point. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen has done, a really nice job, and we know what he's doing in Xfinity. He's also racing at the Oval, so he at least has a chance to now kind of develop that camaraderie with these drivers and with these racers, right? Because he's in and around the garage every week now. Whereas the guys like Kobayashi and Jensen Button and those guys who are coming over for one race out of, the next 6 or 7 of them, they don't get that advantage. So I did think that was interesting. It's something I wanted to point out. When it comes to the standings, Martin Truex Jr. is still your points leader. He's having a really quiet, good season. Top 10 runs often. He's putting himself in the mix. It's kind of a classic MTJ-style year. But what I'm really impressed with is John Hunter Nemechek. He's in 15th right now. He'd be in the playoffs if they started today. Suarez is right in front of him in 14th. We know Suarez has the win, so he's not as worried about points the way some of the other guys are. But look, that 42 car was not good last year at all. And Noah Gragson had to find another ride because of that. And, it's been really, really impressive for John Hunter. I'm happy for him. A guy who came up to the Cup Series, didn't have the best situation, maybe didn't make the most of his runs anyway, goes back down to the trucks and then Xfinity, competes for an Xfinity title last year, and now gets himself another chance in a team that's building with legacy. And we know they had the manufacturer change. They're building things. And he's getting results right away. And look, it's key. He got a couple nice finishes at the drafting tracks, but he's still running towards the front right now, and I'm really impressed with what he's doing. Michael McDowell had a disastrous day yesterday. He ends up, again, having mechanical problems. That's now 2 separate races when you talk about what happened at the drafting tracks and now here at the road course, where we know he would have been fast. We know he would have at least finished, I think, towards the top 15, and yet he finishes almost dead last there in, I think, 37 or 35th. So McDowell's down to 20th. Cindric, here's that interesting group of drivers. Keselowski's right now in the last spot. I talked about him earlier. If he continues to struggle, where he's going to be with Logano and those other guys. You got Briscoe in 17th, Bubba in 18th, Cindric in 19th, McDowell in 20th, and they're all kind of bunched together there. Like, that's a really fascinating group of drivers who all really, really could use a playoff appearance this year, especially guys like Cindric and Briscoe, based on where their teams have been and where they've been. It's going to be interesting to see. And if you go right past that, you see Eric Jones in 21st. Again, that legacy team, he's been doing pretty well as our his teammate John Hunter Nemechek, and then Logano at 22nd. Corey LaJoie qualified 5th yesterday, back to Sunday, and ended up finishing in the 20s. He just didn't have a good run. He had that spin right on the very first lap. Him and Bubba they both qualified well. They both needed a good run here. They both haven't been traditionally great at the road courses, and then they have that issue right away, and they never really recover from it. He's down to 23rd. It's feeling to me like that's the line for where I go. I don't think anybody outside this line's running up and getting in on points. And maybe it's a little early to say that, but outside of the guys that are in that spot like Logano, who we think can do it based on finishes because he's going to be running the top 5 a lot, those guys I think are now in basically win territory the rest of the way. Now maybe I'll be proven wrong there. Maybe they can cleverly get some stage points here and there. They finish great at the drafting tracks. Maybe they have a couple of strategy-based races where they get a top 10 out of the deal. But for guys like LaJoie, Stenhouse, Carson Hocevar, Todd Gilliland, and down the line, you have some other guys there on bigger teams. Josh Berry, Austin Dillon are in 28th and 29th. I don't see them getting there to the top, so that'll be interesting to see. Let's talk about Richmond real quick. This is a race that people have been off on for a lot. Not a lot of excitement around Richmond Raceway. I understand some of it. I think there's the chance that the package improves things. We go back to the short track package, by the way. This was, again, after we talked about what Phoenix was going to look like. Bristol wasn't using it, so now with Richmond and Martinsville coming up, we're going to get a really good look at it. I'm hopeful. I'm not super, super optimistic, but I am hopeful. They're racing this on Easter Sunday at night, which is kind of what they've been doing with the Bristol Dirt the last few years. Now the schedule changes. Of course, they don't go to the Bristol Dirt. They're doing it at Richmond. I'm okay with that. I think ratings-wise, that's what they're looking for. They're going to get them. I don't think you're going to have a packed house at Richmond. Certainly not. And I don't know. I don't know what to expect, but I do want to see. By the way, the Fords have really started to kind of struggle here, and can they get back on track here with a race at Richmond? I think they have a shot to, but I'm looking for those Fords to maybe try and show something. And for that reason, I'm going with Ryan Blaney as my race winner, because I think Blaney's shown you all year he's been really consistent. And I'm looking for those Fords to really say, okay, at least at these types of tracks, we got to be really good, because they have not looked great at the intermediates, and they certainly didn't look good at the road courses or at the road course that we've been to there, and kind of shut out of the top couple spots in the standings again. When you think about the fact that William Byron won the race, which I think I mentioned earlier, but I know I talked about the battle there. Byron, of course, gets a win, and it's his second. Big for him. He's on that track to becoming one of the real dominant racers, but past that, I want the Fords to show some speed at Richmond, so I'll take Blaney and see what he can do. It should be fun, should be interesting. I don't know what to expect out of Richmond. Hopefully it's not a boring race. That's all I can really say there. And hopefully, I know NASCAR fans, some are going to be upset they're racing on Easter, some aren't going to care. But all in all, let's see if they can put a good product at Richmond, because we've got more there coming there with 2 dates, and also an indicator maybe of what the short track package has ahead. So that'll be it for this week. We'll be back on next week. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy the ride here. It's 4 Tire Change rolling on with another race coming up here at Richmond.